There's a generation that remembers the sound of a dial-up modem connecting, waiting by the phone because someone said they'd call around 6, and taping songs off the radio because that was the only way to have them. But that same generation was also the first to have an AIM away message, the first MySpace top 8, the first line outside the Apple store waiting for an iPhone. Nobody's figured out what to call them. Not really Gen X, not really millennial, just stuck in between. Psychologists gave it a name, Xennials, a tiny microgeneration that almost nobody's ever heard of. If you were born between 1976 and 1985, it's probably you. But what's really interesting isn't the label. It's what happened in these people's brains during those years. They grew up in a world with no screens to fix boredom. If you wanted to see a friend, you called their house on a landline and hoped their parents picked up. You'd agree to meet somewhere, the corner, the bus stop, outside the mall, and you just waited. No texting on my way. If you were late, you missed them, period. That kind of life demanded something almost nobody builds anymore: trust. If someone said at 6, you showed up at 6 because there was no other way to let them know. Then, right as this generation was becoming adults, everything flipped upside down. Not slowly, all at once. Cell phones, dial-up internet at home, AIM, MySpace. That specific sound of someone logging on, spending a whole hour picking the perfect away message, hoping one specific person would read it. And here's the part that really explains everything. The region of the brain responsible for adapting to new situations, the prefrontal cortex, doesn't fully finish developing until around age 25. Research on brain maturation confirms that this window stays flexible well into your 20s, which means Xennials hit peak brain plasticity at the exact moment the internet exploded. Young enough to absorb new technology instantly, old enough to remember, in detail, exactly how life worked before it. That combination creates something rare. Call it cultural bilingualism. Older generations tend to view technology with suspicion because they didn't grow up inside it. Younger generations have never known a world without it, so they have nothing to compare it to. But Xennials lived both realities. They can get through an entire dinner without checking their phone, but they also don't panic when a new app shows up. They remember what it was like to be unreachable for hours, something most people under 30 have literally never experienced. And even so, that doesn't scare them either. This shows up in strange, specific ways. Take privacy, for example. Xennials grew up in a world where embarrassing moments actually disappeared. That terrible middle school haircut, that party where you made a fool of yourself, that dramatic breakup at 17. None of it lived anywhere except in people's memory. No tagged photo, no saved story, nothing searchable. And that changes something deep in how memory works. Research on autobiographical memory shows the brain is built to edit our past. Memories shift, simplify, become cleaner stories over time. But when everything gets permanently documented, that natural editing process breaks down. Xennials are the last generation that had the privilege of letting their weirdest years quietly fade away. Here's another detail almost nobody talks about. Many Xennials entered the workforce right during the 2008 financial crisis, exactly when they were trying to build some stability. Research on financial stress shows that economic hardship during this specific life stage can leave a sense of insecurity that doesn't fully go away, even years later, even once things get better. That's why a lot of people in this generation have a strange relationship with money, adaptable, but always a little on guard. They learn to move through change, but there's a quiet voice in the back of their mind that sometimes asks, what if it all falls apart again? And that's where the real paradox shows up. Xennials grew up before helicopter parenting existed. Parents genuinely didn't know where their kids were for hours, and that was normal. So this generation learned to entertain themselves, solve their own problems, and sit with boredom instead of running from it. But they also reached adulthood right when the internet promised to connect everyone, before anyone understood that connection would come with its own problems. So this generation lives inside a permanent contradiction: independent but connected, skeptical but open to change, analog at heart, digital by necessity. And somehow they carry all of it without feeling broken because of it. Xennials remember the before. That's the part almost nobody else has. And because they remember it, they can clearly see what was gained and what was lost. Lost. The ability to disappear for a few hours. Lost. The patience that comes from waiting. Lost. A kind of quiet focus that existed before everything started competing for your attention all the time. But something huge was also gained: instant access to information, connection to the entire planet, opportunities that simply didn't exist before. Maybe that's why so many Xennials describe the same feeling: not quite fitting in anywhere. Too young for some things, too old for others. Like they landed right in the middle of two different worlds and never fully left either one. And maybe that in-between position is exactly the skill. Because in a world that keeps changing faster and faster, having lived through a massive transition and kept your identity intact in the middle of it might be one of the most valuable things a person can carry. Knowing how to adapt without losing who you are. If any of this sounded like you probably already knew why before I even said it. And if you want to keep exploring how we think, remember, and make decisions, stick around. That's exactly what this channel is for.